I'll make a start because no one's filming me. That's good. This. Hello, 1, 2. I always tell the joke. How many? What's the shit? I've forgotten. Yeah. How many years have you been a roadie? 1, 2, 1, 2 years. I always tell that. I want to see a microphone. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming and thanks for staying on. Hopefully. What I've got to say has some resonance with you. I haven't done this presentation before. I'm not one of those who kind of hawks around the same presentation event after event. So this is new. It depends on video. So hopefully what I've got to say to you today will work. There's a little advert. I hope you saw I smuggled that advert in on the back of the football advert this morning. If you do get a chance to buy, much more importantly than this, if you do get a chance to buy, bring it home on Monday on iTunes for the Anne Maguire Fund and for the Bobby Moore Cancer Fund, that would be great. We've had a lot of fun at school doing that song. If you haven't found it yet, Google Disco Mister or on YouTube. It's far better than the tax avoider Gary, what's his name? Pay your taxes, Gary. If you do get a chance to do that, that'd be great. But I'm John Tomsett, I'm head teacher, and I wanted to do this talk called Why Head Teachers Should Be the Head Teacher in the Schools. I was having a chat with Laura McInerney earlier, and she disagreed with that immediately, and I thought, if Laura disagrees with it, then I'm on a loser. But we'll see what you think. But I do think this is true, and I think head teachers in this country are facing a fork in the road. I've talked about this on my blog before. I think we've got to make decisions as a head, whether you want to go off and be an executive head. If you've been a head 11 years like I have, and you're in your 50th year, I'm 50 in August, you think, what on earth do I do now? Because the model is to go and be some super executive head and run several schools and becoming embroiled in the academy chain and do all that kind of stuff. Or you reject all that and you go back and be the lead learner in the school and the head teacher. And so I think in the last couple of years, 3 years, what I've done is I've had lots of opportunities. I was the National Strategist North Yorkshire executive head or consultant head. Rubbish. I spent most of my time on the train to Reading for meetings. It was a shocking designation, and I didn't enjoy it at all. So I've come to the point where I think I can best make most impact on student outcomes by getting back in the classroom and really engaged in learning. Not only just in my own teaching, and I do teach quite a lot, but also in creating the conditions for growth for teachers. So there are two things. There's becoming an executive head or getting back in the classroom, and then there's the second thing where you do two things as a head teacher. I think it's about creating the culture. Tom was talking about it earlier. Creating the culture for growth for teachers, and then I think there's a lot to be said for becoming a teacher again yourself and getting stuck back into the classroom. So I also think this. We've had about £400,000 cut from our budget, and I don't think you can be guessing about what you spend that money on. We spend a lot of money in schools. I have a budget of just over 7 million. And we can't be guessing because every penny needs to go through to student outcomes in one way or another. And that's not being an exam factory. I don't mean we become some exam factory, but what you spend your money on must, in some way or another, help support student learners. That's the key thing. And the outcomes of students in one way or another. If you can trace that through to the outcomes, then you've got some responsibility to do that. I love Bath, Roland S. Bath. If you've not come across Roland S. Bath before, then read that. And that's I think for me, that is it for me. That's what culture's about. If you get the culture right, if you get a place that's hospitable to sustain human learning, then the standardised test results will look after themselves. Right? Tom was talking about it earlier. It is about the culture. What I want to do in the first half of this talk is talk about how I kind of develop culture in schools, and in the second half of this talk, I want to talk about my teaching and how I'm developing teaching using video and doing coaching in schools. So, school culture. Now, bear with me, right? You'll be here because you've read my blog or you've read what I'm going to talk about. Deming was an industrialist and I think a genius. He's credited with resurrecting one single speech in Japan, resurrecting Japan after the war, and kind of his name's on their golden decade or two in the 50s and 60s. And he had an amazing approach to management of organisations, of business organisations. And I think there's a brilliant book. It always happens, doesn't it, if you don't take the hyperlink off. There's a brilliant book that's been written about him. And this is the book, The School for Quality Learning, How You Run a School the Deming Way. Buy that book if you can. I think it's an excellent book. And what I want to talk about first of all is some of the things that Deming says that I think I've tried to do. And I've kind of felt a lot of what I do, I've done 11 years of headship and 26 years of teaching. I've done them and then read the theory afterwards and read the research afterwards, and I think, I found that out myself through instinct, through trial and error, through experience, and someone who's got time to write a book has articulated it in a book of theory. And I find reassurance from that. Except Robert Peel's Progressively Worse. It's the only book that I don't really agree with. Deming has 14 points and 7 diseases. And this is point number 1, constancy of purpose. And that's what he says it is. And if you think about a school, if your school doesn't know why you get up in it, if you don't know what your core purpose of your school is, then I think you're lost to start with. And one thing I learned as a head in my first headship was that you have to know the core purpose of your school, in the same way that Deming says that about constancy of purpose. Ask any of our students, any of our staff, I'm sure any of our parents, and they will tell you that what our core purpose is, to inspire confident learners who will thrive in a changing world. I've beautifully been challenged by parents who said, that's your core purpose, and you've not done this for my son or my daughter, and that's great, right? Because the core purpose really matters. And ours isn't some kind of glib speak. Ours is really, really important. And if you've ever been to interview at school at Huntington with me, I will tell you for the first 10 minutes the importance of every word to inspire confidence will thrive in a changing world. And I think that word thrive is the most important one. I consulted for 6 months on that core purpose. And we had succeed, and the students changed it to thrive. And I love thrive. And I go back, I know Ken Robinson is so out of vogue now, he's so last year, but that stuff he says about the conditions for growth is absolutely right. I think my job as a head teacher is to get the conditions for growth right. And I think it's important to get the conditions for growth right for teachers. And if you get the conditions for growth right for teachers, then the biggest beneficiaries are students. If you get it that way round. Anybody who puts students first up there on their own is kind of getting it a bit wrong, because it has to be the both together. So constancy of purpose, Deming, good stuff. He says that. I think my job, relentlessly, is to make the job easier for teachers, is to facilitate them to do their job. Strip out all the rubbish. Strip out all those massive data trawls. Strip out stuff that gets in the way of them teaching, right? And planning really good lessons. I think you have to plan really good lessons. I'm hard-nosed about planning lessons, but I think that's the work, and it's not filling in data. In Yorkshire, if you're from the south of Yorkshire, we have that line. You need to stop weighing the pig and you've got to fatten the pig or something like that. It's a Yorkshire term, I think. And I think it absolutely works. His number 8 for an industrialist was that. Right? Drive out the fear from institutions. Fear in institutions and fear in schools is so destructive. It's so shockingly destructive. You have to drive it out. Gorgeous. The joy of being in work and the joy of taking pride in what you do. Then we got this absolutely right. There's a great line in a second I'll show you about performance-related pay, which I think is a complete nonsense. The vigorous programme of education and self-improvement, and CPD, but personalised CPD that individual teachers take responsibility for. And then the transformation. One of the things that I've done that has proved transformational in our school development is to completely turn on its head how we construct the school development plan. I think it's only one thing you need to worry about in a school. So the one thing you have to worry about in a school is the quality of teaching and improving the quality of teaching. There should be no development plan that doesn't have only that in it. That's all you need. So what I did 2 or 3 years ago was win the argument with the staff. I spent a long time on the document I wrote about why we should all become better teachers, right? And then I said to them, how do we do it then? And so if you read our school development plan, which is very, very thin, every strategy we have in there has an advocate from the staff. Now, if you're a head teacher and you're presenting the development plan, it's a win-win because the staff have constructed it. You've set the strategic direction, the staff have constructed it. So everybody's part of making that school better. Right? It's great. So, Deming stuff. There's a great line from the book of running a school the Deming way. About performance-related pay. If you don't think it can be transferred, just read that slide. What Deming says about performance-related pay in industry in America, perfect. We've got all those things about what performance-related pay, the damage it does to institutions, and especially to schools. So I did a talk the other day. It was great. I did a talk for. It was Osiris or Optimus Education, I can't remember which one it was, and I'd said I'd do it ages ago because they'd seen I'd done some stuff on performance-related pay. And then I got the programme through, and there were several workshops. It's a great workshop. We said how to maintain morale for teachers who aren't bad enough to be on capability, but not good enough to have their pay award go up. It's a cracker. Yeah, it's a cracker one. And then there was another one which said, how to get the legal things all right when you're putting people down the pay scale, right? And mine was called Why Performance-Related Pay is a Nonsense and What to Do About It. And I rang them and I said, look, do you really want me to come along? Because I might be slightly off message. But she let me go anyway. And, but yeah, just amazingly mad things that are happening in schools around performance-related pay. Completely mad. So, I think Deming's great. And this is what we've done to try and make our school somewhere that's hospitable to sustain human learning. Talked about that. Budget shrinking, and so I just say, unless it's focused on teaching and learning, I'm not interested in spending it, and so we invest loads and loads of money on the stuff that matters. We have performance-related pay, but we don't. See what I mean? We have a really rigorous process, but no madness. I think we call our performance management performance development, and we absolutely have the golden thread through to CPD and through to outcomes. And one of the things that we've done is bring, and I got a lot of stick from this in York when I announced it to head teachers, but we've brought performance management in just to the SLT. So the 7 of us do 114 teachers. We performance manage 114 teachers. I line manage personally 31 teachers. So I do all their observations 2 or 3 times a year. When I told Rob Code I was there, that's what I did. He said, you're an idiot, I think was the phrase Rob used. But actually, it's great work. I spend, for every one of those 31, I spend 2 or 3 lessons observing with them and working with them and coaching them and mentoring them. It's great impact on their performance and outcomes. So I think that's really good, and we've got a very personalised CPD. We don't think that one size fits all. Similarly to Tom Sherrington, if you heard Tom talk earlier, we don't do the big one show does all for CPD. We 3 or 4 years ago we decided to send the children home early on a Monday, so every other Monday we have 2 hours of CPD. We also have 5 days of CPD, so that's 63 hours a year of CPD. This year I nicked 2 more days and only one parent has realised. It's great. So you know those 2 days that go into the summer holidays, so you kind of have a 5.5 weeks of summer holiday. Well, we're not going to be in school for those. But we kept the other 5 as well, so we disaggregated. We've got 73 hours of training this year. I did tell the Director of Children's Services and Chair of Governance, I said we're just going to do it. And so far, so good. Try really hard to evaluate the impact. This is where I think where we're least effective, because I think we're really bad at that in school education generally. I think we're rubbish at evaluation in this country, probably internationally, evaluating what we do. I've talked about that, and then emphasis all the time on the golden thread to outcomes. What's great when we interviewed a lot of people the other day for internal posts, and one of the questions I always ask is, how would you know in 2 years' time if you'll be successful? And again and again and again and again, they said, oh, if I get this job right, student outcomes will improve. Right? Good. So that's kind of the school has that message. So culturally, that's what we do. You can go on my blog and read my blog about well-being, but in terms of setting the tone, and facilitating teachers to become better, and creating a culture of improvement and focus, we are beginning to run the school the Deming way. And I would urge everybody to get that book, because I think it's a great book. I'm like Autolycus from The Winter's Tale. I'm a snapper up of unconsidered trifles, little things I have my radar on all the time. There was a brilliant thing on the BBC website about 2 weeks ago, when they interviewed the head of Saracens Rugby Football Club, and talked about the culture, the Saracens culture. And I think that's brilliant. So a read of that. And you just map that over a school. That's what I'm trying to do in a school. Treat people unbelievably well, and then they work unbelievably hard. I don't promise them, anybody who comes to work at Huntington, an easy time. I tell them it will be really exciting, and they'll get really well trained, and they'll be really fulfilled, and they'll enjoy it. But they'll work really hard. I was talking to Kevin from the NUT the other day, earlier, about how so few people, well, none of the NUT went on strike in my school. And I'm a big union man. I'm a big, massive union man. I promote that everybody should be in a union, but nobody wanted to strike. And I think he said that's probably because, they're quite happy with their lot. That's probably true. So, that's about culture. One of the women I really admire in education is a woman called Annie Magill. I heard her speak, you might have heard her speak in the past. She's a head teacher, and she did a talk a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, about what she finds when she goes into outstanding schools and failing schools, and she did it on 5 areas, and she did one on culture. And